Welcome to The Way Left. This pod is TDS, Heritage, Government, Feckless. So, start off, TDS is called Trump Derangement Syndrome. That's the term that MAGA uses for people that have a problem with what he does, and we'll talk about that and see who's really deranged. Heritage is the Heritage Foundation, and we'll talk about the ongoings, the latest with the Tucker Carlson interview of Nick Fuentes. And then we'll talk about the feckless government, from MAGA to conservatives to liberals to Democrats. So let's start off with TDS, Trump Derangement Syndrome. So MAGA uses this to describe people like myself who criticize him, take things that he says are real. So let me give you an example. Here's a perfect example, and tell me who's deranged. Trump said that he was going to reduce pharmaceutical costs, which we should definitely look into. He used terms like 2,000%, 200%, 500%. We're going to say trillions of dollars, trillions. Okay, so let's just take 200%. If something costs $100 and you reduce it by 200%, that would mean that you would get $100 back. So I could go and buy my whatever anybody's on. Xanax, a big popular one. So I'd go get my Xanax. They tell me it's $100. Trump comes out and says they're going to reduce it by 200%. So the pharmacy is going to not only give me my drugs, they're going to give me $100 back. Okay, so maybe he flubbed it. Well, then he used 2,000%. So you can see where that's going. People say, well, that's just Trump being Trump. So here's the secret. I don't need that orange ass clown being Trump as the president of the United States. He can be Trump being Trump when he's selling his Trump coin and grifting off that, or whether he's on Truth Social, which there's nothing truthful, and he types in all caps on his Truth Social. He can be Trump being Trump there. But I don't even mean Trump being Trump with policy in this country. That's a fact. Let's see what else he said. Venezuela. Now, we're bombing boats because there's a whole narco trade that we're going after with Venezuela. Clearly, there's drugs coming from Venezuela, but they talk about that this is an executive order, a national emergency, and that he's not going to go through Congress for war powers. He's just going to bomb boats coming off the coast of Venezuela that they identify as drug boats. Now, we found that they killed some fishermen. Now, let's say that there are drugs coming off there, and I've listened to people that know Venezuela say there are a lot of drugs coming out there. They're not going directly to America. Generally, they're going to the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, one of them. And he says, and his crew, Marco Rubio, the man who has lost his soul and sold himself out to MAGA, have said that it's fentanyl. And he said for every boat that they destroy, they save 25,000 lives. Now, remember, these are like cigarette boats, the big speeders. These aren't huge craft. 25,000. So by the 10 or 15 that he's done, 25,000 times 10, 250,000 people. That's what we've saved by bombing those boats, according to Trump. So who's deranged? Oh, he's just exaggerating. That's just a Trumpism. Huh. Well, everything that comes out of his mouth is a Trumpism. He's talked about the trillions of dollars he's saved the country by doing tariffs, all the money that's brought in. What he doesn't understand is we're paying for that, and that's the way tariffs works. So who's deranged? This is the man who pardoned the January 6th insurrectionists. Who's deranged? This is the man who says the 2020 election was stolen. Again, who's deranged? We can go into all this. But the point being here is I'm not fucking deranged. And people that are critical of others, not only Trump, but others, and point out the fact of what they said, as Noam Chomsky says, you don't have to be smart. You just have to listen and read. Listen to what he says. Now, this is a man who's in the White House who says he is in the best shape ever. Ever. He's the greatest, he is the best in shape president ever. So again, who's deranged? The man has markings all over for where they do things to put in IVs. He's almost 80. He eats frickin' McDonald's. Who's deranged? Am I the one deranged for questioning whether he's telling the truth? Actually, I don't have to question whether he's telling the truth. In most cases, he's not telling the truth. That's his thing. So who's deranged? Is it me or is it Laura Loomer, the big influencer, the xenophobic, racist, orange all over her influencer? Again, who's deranged? I don't think I'm deranged when I call people out for stats. The economy is doing great, except all the stats don't say that. Inflation is up, but Trump says inflation is down. His own staff says inflation's up. Now, what is it as high as it was during Biden and COVID? Nope. But that was a while ago. Year to year, it's gone up. Who's deranged? Now, I can go down derangement. I can go down some of those, but I don't as much because I'm not on 4chan. I'm not a QAnon conspiracy theorist. I don't listen to a lot of Rogan. And when I listen to Trump, I actually listen to what he says instead of just following the MAGA cult line. So who's deranged? I think MAGA has TDS. In fact, I know they do. They believe everything that comes out of that cult warrior's mouth, and he's done a good job with that. So let's start with that. Think about that when they say, oh, you've got TDS because you dislike Trump, or you dislike his policies, or you dislike his executive orders, or you dislike the fact that he's circumventing Congress when he's bombing ships in Venezuela, when he's putting in executive orders for tariffs, which we hope that the Supreme Court is going to overturn because taxation with representation comes from Congress, not from the fucking president. That's the point. That's why we have a House and Senate. We have a judicial and a Department of Justice. So don't tell me who's deranged. I'll tell you exactly who's deranged. Anybody believes the shit that's coming out of that orange-ass clown's mouth. We'll come back to this a little bit. I mean, I could go on and on. We could do TDS discussions all day long, right? It's pretty easy. From the right, they're going to say, I'm deranged. Well, he's just being Trump when he says stupid shit. The healthiest guy in the world. Well, guess what? Now at the White House, they actually have a little paper sign that says Oval Office from the West Wing. I'm sure it's really hard to find a giant Oval Office, but guess who it's there for? The healthiest guy in the world, our president. They have a sign that says Oval Office, so he knows where he's going. And I'm deranged. He has an MRI, and it's just a standard procedure. Yeah, we all get MRI standard procedure. And I understand that the President of the United States needs a heightened sense of health and security. But we don't know why he had an MRI. Oh, it's just a standard thing. Just standard body scan. It's fine. So I'm deranged. Think about that. So let's move on to real derangement. And let's move on to the Heritage Foundation, right? So the Heritage Foundation, as I talked about in Project 2025, and also talked about in my previous podcast, Project 2025, and another previous podcast about the oligarchy and the grift. The Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank. One of the heads of it, his name is Kevin Roberts. Now let's remember who Kevin Roberts is. Kevin Roberts is a guy who said the model for the U.S. is Hungary. So Hungary, a country led by Viktor Orban, has said that liberalism is dead. So freedom, that Bill of Rights is dead. Freedom of speech, freedom of media, freedom of religion. That's what he said. And Kevin Roberts follows in that lead. This is a guy who's basically said it's against the law to march for rights. He is homophobic. He is extremely strict on religion, basically a Christian authoritarianism, illiberal. This is what Kevin Roberts said, though. He says he agrees with him. Now, Tucker Carlson, who again follows in that line, let's put this group together, right? There's this group of people, and this is where we get to derangement syndrome, right? So Tucker Carlson interviews Nick Fuentes, So let's talk about who Nick Fuentes is. So Nick Fuentes is right of MAGA. So remember how I define things. And I think we can define it this way. We have in the center, right? The center. We have right of that, which would be conservatives, then MAGA, then far right fucking nut jobs. Now they pretty much come in together. So far right would be Stephen Miller, who basically wants to cleanse this country of anybody of color other than his wife, who is basically a xenophobe. He is a homophobe, and he's a racist. He's part of MAGA, but I'd say he's far right MAGA. So MAGA is not really conservative. They say they're conservative through the Heritage Foundation. Believe me, that's not what conservatism is. That's not what William Buckley would say conservatism is. That's not what anybody that would be a conservative. David Frum, Bill Kristol, who was more of a neocon, but definitely is righted his ways in terms of the thought process around TDS, Trump Derangement Syndrome. Anyway, Tucker Carlson's the same guy that said, Hungary is a great country. I love their model. So just like Kevin Roberts, totally in agreement. And believe me, these guys are heavily involved in the Heritage Foundation think tank. Tucker Carlson's also said that the grocery stores are great in Russia and that Putin is doing a better job with his country than Zelensky is doing with Ukraine. So this is Tucker Carlson, who's also talked about the great replacement theory, which is that all the other ethnicities are trying to replace white people. That's what they're doing. So the oppressed are going against the oppressor. The oppressor would be the whites or the rich. I don't believe much of that makes any sense to anybody, but that's his thing. The great white replacement theory. We've got to make sure that we cut off all immigration and everybody's a Christian. And he is for, basically, Tucker Carlson, that is for a Christian authoritarian, as we talked about with the Machiavellian style, an oligarchy, a white oligarchy. He's basically said it out loud. Just listen to him. As Chomsky says, listen, read. So Tucker interviews Nick Fuentes. So Nick Fuentes, no, he's a joy. So what Nick Fuentes is he's a hardcore Christian. He believes the Bible is the word of God. He is very anti-Semitic. He hates Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, which there's things in there that you could say, woof, an AIPAC, which is a lobbying group in the U.S. for supposed to be for Jews in America, but obviously it's influenced by Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the prime minister, the leader of Israel. He's totally against, he's anti-Semitic and bases that on Christianity, the New Testament, and Revelation. This is Nick Fuentes. He's also pretty clear about women's roles. He's pretty clear he's against sodomy, so he's a homophobe. He's pretty clear about immigration. He's a xenophobe. He's a racist. I mean, I'll just listen to him. He's actually pretty intelligent when he talks. It's just the topics that he talks about. Again, this would be like FDS, Fuentes Derangement Syndrome. The people on the Fuentes side would say, I'm deranged. He's actually talking sense. Yeah, he's talking sense to right-wing extremists who are all about the Tucker Carlson great replacement theory. That's who he's talking sense to. But I'm deranged because I think what he says, the majority of what he says, isn't in line with humanity, isn't in line with earthens, people that live on Earth. He wants to segregate society. He said, Nick Fuentes has said, that he would in America, he would like Taliban rule, but a Christian Taliban rule. So instead of Sharia law, it would be a Christian theocracy authoritarianism. He's a fan of that. He's really not even a fan of Trump because Trump just isn't that far. Now, they have brought this guy in. This guy's had dinner with J.D. Vance, or at a big dinner with J.D. Vance. Trump, met Trump. Nick Fuentes, this is, the white supremacist, basically. And he's backed by a lot of right-wing extreme groups. Those are his groypers or whatever they call it. All you got to do is look at him on YouTube, watch him for a few minutes and see who's deranged. So Tucker interviews this guy, doesn't really throw him under the bus for his theories. And Kevin Roberts comes out and says, hey, that was a great interview. Now, Kevin Roberts, again, mind you, is one of the heads of the Heritage Foundation. And there was a lot of noise about that. So this is where deranged comes in, okay? So you got Megyn Kelly, who's a right-wing. She used to be in the middle. Now she's a right-wing. She loves Trump. She loves MAGA. She hates Democrats. Pretty smart lady. You got Ben Shapiro, who is the guy that bitched about getting bullied as a kid, but he's a complete prick. He probably wasn't getting bullied. It's just getting his ass kicked because he's a complete. I know that bullying exists. Ben Shapiro, so he's a right winger, obviously pro-Israel. He's Jewish. I would say I'm not a neocon. I wouldn't say full orange on him for MAGA, but definitely more than most. Obviously, I have Tucker Carlson in there. You have Mark Levin, who's a Jewish conservative, very much the end of the world type of guy, right winger. You have Jesse Waters, who's a IQ of 78, who runs Fox Fix News. You have Sean Hannity coming in there. Everybody knows who Sean Hannity is. He's a bad version. I mean, he's a bad replacement for Rush Limbaugh. I don't think he may be even crazier than Rush Limbaugh. So all these guys come together, guys and girls. They come together and they're really pissed that Tucker interviewed Nick Fuentes and didn't throw him under the bus for being a white supremacist or being anti-Semitic or, hardcore revelation, Christian Taliban type Sharia law in America, homophobic. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You feckless motherfuckers. So you're not arguing over the insurrection, right? You're not arguing over the grift, right? The Trump coin, the anonymous crypto deals that they're doing, the sexual assaults, the him not saying that the election was lost in 2020, the stuff that Tucker Carlson has said about Hungary and Russia. We're not going to go down that road. But because he interviewed this guy that we now think is bad for us, it's taken us too far right. Are you fucking kidding me? Too far right? The Oath Keepers? The Proud Boys? Do you know who these people are? They're right-wing extremists. They've supported those people. Yeah, pardon all those people. So we're going to go down this road, and they're just going to tit for tat back and forth. And I'm like, you're all on the same boat. Yeah, maybe Nick is on the far right of your MAGA boat, but he's on your boat. It's clear. So you're just running around with your heads cut off. Oh my God, we're going to have all these fights back and forth and talk about how great we are. But we're just totally against Nick Fuentes. And because Kevin Roberts said that it was a good interview, he had to apologize. Now, there were some conservatives, whether they're conservatives anymore, conservative, and I'll define liberalism versus conservatives here in a little bit so everybody understands the nature of that. Now, remember, these are just terms, right? Terms doesn't mean that it's everything that it says it is, meaning it's more like a faith or a religion. Am I liberal? Yes. What does that mean? Boy, we could have 20 people in here and we'd all define it differently. What does it mean to be conservative? I can tell you what it means to be MAGA, in my opinion. You have TDS. You have Trump Derangement Syndrome, because that's what MAGA is. MAGA has taken over the Republican Party. It has not taken over conservatism. The problem is you can't get elected if you're conservative. You can only get elected if you're MAGA on the right. So they have gone down this road of tearing it up. Kevin Roberts had to apologize. Poor Kevin. I mean, he loves Hungary. Nick loves Hungary. They love racism. They love xenophobia. They love an immigration crackdown so that more people leave your country to live in your country. They love that whole idea. But Nick is just too far right for us. As if Stephen Miller wasn't already too far right for you. As if pardoning insurrectionists wasn't too far right for you. Nick Fuentes is your issue. Oh, he's an issue. But he's an issue for you, MAGA, because you have derangement syndrome. You've basically come up with this nest, and it's all the left's fault. And it tires me out. but I love it. They get lots of feeds. Oh, their audience is going up. You got to have a little Red Bull here because I'm just getting too excited. I'm not even going to take a break because I love this in the sense that it's easy to see the writing on the wall. I read what they say. I know what they say. I know how they spin it. I mean, let's be honest. Speaking of Trump Derangement Syndrome, Fox News was based on Roger Ailes' own vision. He was the guy with Rupert Murdoch that made Fox what it is. And it was his vision that they had to lead by. And it was divisiveness. He called Barack Obama a Muslim. Oh my God. So who's deranged? Think about the Heritage Foundation and what they're trying to do. They started Project 2025. Think about what that leads into. Women. I mean, it leads into like Nick Fuentes' thoughts and Curtis Yarvin's thoughts, who are all connected to this pie. It leads to women not having a right to vote. Voter suppression on people of color. Voter suppression on people of difference in opinion or ideology. So, yeah, there it is, right? So this leads us into government. When I say feckless, means they have no force. They're doing bullshit. This TDS is a perfect example of feckless. You have people interviewing on CBS now, interviewing Gavin Newsom, calling him out for going low, meaning saying, it's basically repeating what Donald Trump says and being mean, being crass, throwing people under bus. Remember, Donald Trump, when we had the No Kings protests in this country, which the right to protest is part of our freedom, is part of being a liberal society, as long as you're not violent, which the No Kings protests that had 7 million people, which I attended in Denver, Colorado, was completely peaceful. He created videos of him in a jet dropping shit all over people in the United States that differ with his opinion. But that's not a big topic. They think it's funny, right? So when Gavin Newsom does the same thing, the media calls him out, says, "Aren't you just going too low?" I mean, Jake Tapper writes a book on Biden and his presidency and how it failed, which we can all agree there are a lot of failures in there. I'm going to talk about a few of those. But boy, he hasn't written a book about Trump. Wonder why. Well, they've done a good job of fear. But boy, that never comes up in conversation with Megyn Kelly or Ben Shapiro. And if it does come up, it comes up as if, the left are hacks, right? Trump's just being Trump. Who's fucking deranged? I wish I could say it was me. I wish there was a solution. I could read a book and go, oh, this is the solution. Let's fucking start a trade war with the entire world. Let's shut down the government. Right? Let's release insurrectionists. Let's do immigration reform to the point that we arrest innocent people without due process or habeas corpus. Let's do that. Now tell me who's deranged. Okay. Oof, love it. Love it. All right. So let's talk about the feckless government. Let's talk about some things that have gone on, whether that's Democrat or Republican. Now let's start with Biden, right? So Joe Biden wins the presidency. It's like 77 or 78, the oldest person to win presidency. Clearly, none of these guys should be running at that age. That's a whole different discussion that I'm going to come out with the project 2026 and beyond. Why the fuck are these old people running our country? I mean, some of them aren't even boomers anymore. They're like from the silent generation of World War I, it seems like. So Biden, when he gets elected, says, I'm just a transition piece. I'm trying to help, right? We need to move on from Trump. So he wins legally. I know I'm deranged thinking that he won the election because that would be Trump Derangement Syndrome because I think he actually won the election legally. And of course, if you're MAGA, then that's being Trump Derangement Syndrome. Again, who's fucking deranged? And so what he does is he goes through the presidency. He's obviously losing some cognition. doesn't have an immigration policy, has identitarian politics, which is basically, we're going to save this group, we're going to save trans, we're going to do this, we're not going to do this. We're not speaking to all the people. He obviously has to deal with COVID and inflation, dumps way too much money into the system. Inflation goes kind of rampant. And then he decides he's going to run again, right? So this is after not having immigration reform. Democrats are preaching defund the police after George Floyd. It's fucking crazy stuff. We're fighting for trans people, which I'm all for in some regard. But let's remember the entire population. See, we're all earthens, but we do have to leverage at a political scale what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we can't just identify with one group and then another group. We got to identify with everybody. That's hard, but that's politics, right? And Trump seems to do that pretty well in the sense that I'm going to save everybody. Now, he's fucking lying. The farmers are dying off, the trade war, things like that. But that's politics. So we're going to defund the police. We're going to not have any immigration reform. And guess what? I'm going to run again. Even though I said I wasn't going to run again because I knew it'd be sold, I'm going to run again. Basically, throw Kamala Harris under the bus. She didn't have a chance. Whether she was the right candidate is an argument for another day. She didn't have a chance because of what Biden set her up to do. That's a feckless fucking Democrat. Now, Joe Biden done a lot of good things in the past? Yes. Almost all people have done good things in the past. I can think of one that hasn't, at least one. Nancy Pelosi. She's been in Congress for 40 years. She voted for the Tax Reform Act of '86 that destroyed the middle class. She voted for Iraq and for Afghanistan. She was part of the destruction of the middle class while she did insider trading. Mitch McConnell's state is a fucking joke. Kentucky is starving, but he's the leader. He was the leader for years. Saving the government, I guess, putting in conservative justices who overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, maybe they're effective, but I still call them feckless because they're not making this country better. They're only making their personal situation better because the length they're in office and the way they buy in. That's feckless. Let's talk about other feckless things that are going on right now. So we have a government shutdown, a shutdown of the government. Now, in Australia, my wife noted to me that if it does have to shut down because of budget problems, they actually fire all the staff, fire all the representatives, and redo it. So they never shut down. There may be some goods, there may be some bads about that. But we have a shutdown. So I have TDS if I blame the MAGA, and if you blame the left, from the left side, then they say, you don't understand. It's both of their faults. This is how we got here. But let me ask a question. So there's two big things going on right now. There's more than two. But when we talk about the shutdown, let's talk about the two things that are the hottest issues. Let's talk about SNAP, which is food stamps. Okay? So I'm going to pull up here what SNAP benefits. So everybody says if you're on the right, you're going to say you're a fucking communist for having SNAP, for feeding people, right? Feeding people that don't have food, that can't afford food. Okay? And the other is you've got SNAP and then you have healthcare. Okay? So let's speak to SNAP. So everybody says they should get a job because they have to get a job so they're not on food stamps. Well, most of these people work, but let's just talk about some percentages. Okay? 39% of SNAP beneficiaries are under 18. 39%. This is the cord, and you can pull these stats up everywhere. They may waver. This is when a plus minus 1 or 2. 10% are disabled, non-elderly. So we're at 49%. Okay? 20% are over the age of 60, considered elderly. I'm not saying everybody over 60 is elderly. I could say probably everybody over 70 is. And those are the people running our fucking country. Boy, I'm deranged. So that totals 10 plus 20. We can add here. I know that that's a tough thing. That's not math. It's just arithmetic. So if we do 10 plus 20, that's 30 plus 39, 69%. And the other 31%, you would say get a job. Now, most of those people have jobs. They just can't afford without the benefits. Some of those people have to take care of people at home. And I'm not saying there's no grift. There's grift in everything. But we spend $100 billion a year on grift. Well, we spend a lot more on grift. I mean, we could go down that. We did go down that road in the oligarchy. But let's just talk about that. So we have 69% of SNAP beneficiaries are basically not abled adults. So we're not going to feed kids. We're not going to feed the elderly or disabled when they need it because we're afraid they're abusing the system. So let's talk about the tax cuts. So we cut Medicaid, we cut Medicare because there's all that grift in there. We also cut the taxes for the top 1%. What we've also done, and I call this feckless, actually this is on purpose, right? So Donald Trump, they gave even more tax breaks to the wealthy. And this is recent. So this goes back to, am I deranged? So he is doing things behind the scenes. Again, taxation with representation. What the fuck does that mean? It means Congress, who represents us, the House of Representatives and Senators, are the people we voted for. They impute tax, not Donald Trump, not some presidential. And I know the Heritage Foundation wants it to work that way. They specifically want the president to have more powers. They want to go Federalist Papers times 10, right? They want the oligarchy. They want the authoritarian. They want autocracy. They spell it out in Project 2025. They spell it out when they say they love countries like Hungary. When Tucker Carlson talks about great replacement theory. When Nick Fuentes talks about Taliban-like rule, but by Christian autocracy, white Christian autocracy. So let's remember what wealth is, okay? In this country, basically, you're talking about real wealth in the top 5%, which I think is $400,000 and over annual income. Top 1% is extreme. You're well into the millions. So the top 10% of us support 50% of the economy in terms of consumerism, okay? In terms of the tax, what we're going to do is we're going to try to not pay certain benefits, and we're going to give more tax benefits to the wealthy, okay? That's what we're doing. So SNAP benefits are $100 billion. Does that sound like a lot? Well, it's a lot of money. Well, we increased ICE funding this past year by $75 billion. So we're going to incarcerate people, but we're not going to feed people. Let me remind you, because I have Trump Derangement Syndrome, that the shutdown in the first presidency of Trump, they funded SNAP. But this time they decided not to, even though the courts are pushing them to do it. They have the money to do it, but they won't do it because they're fighting a good fight. And that leads us into healthcare and the shutdown and why the Democrats are trying to fight for this. So what we have is the Affordable Care Act, which a lot of people call Obamacare. That was the Democrats' idea. Again, the feckless politicians, and sometimes they're not, there was an effort to put in affordable health care in this country. This is basically the only country in the world, first world country, being like G20 or Global 20 or Global 40, countries you would consider first world in terms of finances. That doesn't mean they're a first world country in terms of how they treat their citizens. That you can add medical bankruptcy. So we can't feed our fucking people, right? 1 in 10 or 1 in 8 have a food insecurity in this country, the richest country in the world. Healthcare is out of control, right? Their benefits are going to go, their price is going to go up between 2 and 5 times. So that's like Trump's 200 to 500%, but the wrong direction. The Democrats tried to put something in place with Obamacare. I didn't go for it. Should have been Medicare for all. They had the votes. They didn't do it. That was not something I liked when Obama did that. That was feckless. Should have done it. Should have paid for it. There are lots of ways to pay for it. Didn't do that. And so the Democrats are fighting in the shutdown to say, hey, we need to extend these subsidies for ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, so that these prices don't go up. Now, remember, a lot of red states use this. In fact, more red states use the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, than blue states. I don't care. Again, look at my podcast on Civil War. I don't want to break up. I want to help everybody. So they're fighting for that. And the Republicans keep telling us they have a health care plan. They've had one since 1994, I think it was, or 92, Newt Gingrich. The thing is, we've never seen it. All we've seen is prices go up. And the Democrats are part of that. At least they proposed this solution. Maybe it's a terrible solution. Some people would say that we should just privatize everything. How's that work for those kids that can't even get SNAP benefits? They sure in the fuck can't afford health care. So this is a feckless government. We're splitting a divide. So let's talk about what Peter Thiel said. For those that don't know who Peter Thiel, he's a guy out preaching about the Antichrist. He's the funder of J.D. Vance, former partner of Elon Musk and PayPal, a guy that says democracy and freedom cannot work together. Interesting. He's a big fan of Curtis Yarvin, who proposes authoritarianism and women can't vote. He's a big fan of Carl Schmitt, who's a Nazi who basically is the precipice to what Curtis Yarvin came up with, which is authoritarianism, which is based on Machiavelli's principle of an oligarch and an authoritarian. But he said something interesting after Mamdani got elected as the mayor of New York. So Mamdani is a democratic socialist. What does that mean? More government intervention and try to help people survive the cost of living. Now, people say that leads to communism. There's a difference between socialism and communism. But let's not even talk about that. Let's just say he's a democratic socialist, which is what he is. He's a Muslim, and he won some Jewish vote in New York City. Now, New York City is not our whole country. It's New York City. It's obviously the financial capital of the world, and so an important city from that sense, and also a great city to visit. Love it. It's a blue city. He beat Andrew Cuomo, who is, speaking of feckless, was like Trump, accused of all sorts of sexual assault, grift. His son, Chris Cuomo, who won't write about, who basically, was it Chris Cuomo or Jake Tapper? I think it was maybe both that wrote about Biden, but won't say much about Trump anymore because they're afraid, fearful, they need to collect their dollars. Mario Cuomo, who used to be the mayor, governor of New York, seems like a good guy, and he created two monster sons, or sons that I would say have their own derangement syndromes and are feckless because they sell stuff. Be beat by Andrew Cuomo. Peter Thiel comes out. This is Peter Thiel, right wing. He's actually gay. That's neither here nor there, but he does fight for the party that wants to get rid of, the Nick Fuentes side of the party, the Heritage Foundation, wants to basically get rid of rights for gays. But of course, he's rich enough that wouldn't matter. But that being said, Peter Thiel said something very important. He said, if you create this inequality in income, what you get is the proletariat rising up. So what the proletariat is basically you go back to Marxism, you go back to the revolutions in France, you go back in the history. You have the bourgeoisie, the rich, and then you have the proletariat, the workers, who have no property. Now remember, Peter Thiel's a backer of the Curtis Yarvin methodology, which is people without property don't have the right to vote. Now, he came out and said that we shouldn't be surprised by people like Mamdani or a push towards socialism, and he called it communism, because they're like, fuck, I can't get anything. I need somebody to help me out. I need the government to help me out. He's saying that inequality is getting too great. Of course they're going to push up. So we fight for taxes to basically get rid of the tax on the wealthy. We don't fund SNAP benefits. We increase the Department of Defense, which is now the Department of War, which managed by a guy who used to do a talk show on Fox News, Pete the white supremacist Hegseth, who's renaming facilities from Confederate soldiers. So basically, Peter Thiel's pointing out the obvious. The obvious is, the oppressed, the people at the bottom are like, fuck, dude, I can't afford rent, I can't afford food. And when I try to get out of it and get SNAP benefits, they won't give me that. My healthcare premiums are tripling or quadrupling or going up 5 times. They're taking away legal aliens that happen to be my friends or in my family. They're bombing boats in Venezuela. So we should be surprised at this, right? And he says we shouldn't. He's right. What the fuck? But in MAGA, that's Trump Derangement Syndrome. What that is that he is a communist. This is bad for the country. And the fucking Democrats didn't even back him. Right? Chuck Schumer didn't even tell you who he voted for. I'm sure he voted for that frickin' grifter Andrew Cuomo. Because, God, he just can't stand it. Schumer and Pelosi done a lot of great things. You've been around too fucking long. You aged out, bro. You know, you're Joe Namath at the end of his career. His knees wouldn't work in football, right? Get out. You don't have to agree with everything. There are common grounds. There are conservative, social, and liberal philosophies that can mix. But the Democrats have done a terrible job of that. Go my way or highway. Trump did great with that. He created everybody in this, in my mind, gave them Trump Derangement Syndrome, and they all went MAGA. They won that way by basically succumbing to the art of the deal. That's feckless on both sides. And it's disgusting as people are waiting for food. We can't afford to feed our country. But Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and the Mag fucking 7 companies can sit around and make billions and build their off-site facilities for the end of the world. And you're saying to me, well, you can't just take all this money from the rich. Well, some of them don't pay taxes. And we'll talk about in Project 2020 or 2026 and beyond, another podcast to come. Give me a fucking break. Do we need to spend over $1 trillion on military when we're already the top? Do we need to spend $100 billion on ICE when we have the safest land border that's unprotected with Canada? Of course, we hate them now. So give me a solution. Who has derangement syndrome? Okay. So let's define liberal versus conservative, right? So liberal versus conservative, those are just terms. When I say liberal, I also talk about liberalism. Liberalism is different than liberal. Liberalism is the Bill of Rights. It's freedom of speech, freedom of media, freedom of religion, freedom to protest. Secularism. So conservatism is a commitment to traditional values and ideas, opposition to change or innovation. Okay, so across the board, if you're super conservative, you don't want change. You don't want things to go a different way. Now, who are conservatives? Now, you can bring conservative in a lot of things, but let's think about who conservatives might have been, and let's think of who liberals might have been. So conservatives, and I'm not throwing any side under the bus, or I'm throwing both sides under the bus. A conservative would be somebody that said, you know what? I'm going to not support the revolution. And not only am I not going to support it, but I'm going to be a loyalist to King George in the Revolutionary War period, the late 1800s, late 1700s, 18th century. Now, yeah, I'm not saying all of them are conservative, but you would lean conservative. Conservative would be those that fought for slavery. So the Democrats were the big ones that fought for slavery in the South. They were called conservatives. Lincoln was actually a Republican, and he was called a liberal. They didn't want it to change. They wanted their slaves. They wanted entitlements. And then what did we do after Civil War? We allowed that to continue. Reconstruction failed. The rights of blacks in the South didn't succeed. Proponents of theological conservatism, that would be a little far. It's a cultural, social, and political philosophy that seeks to promote and preserve traditional institutions, customs, and values. So here's where I agree. We do need institutions. We do need some values in society and some customs. But like I talked about the Constitution, it is a living document. We need more amendments. We need to change. Do we need to rush? Do we need to be anarchical about it? No. So we do need some conservative methodology, but do we need to live by those principles? Do we still, if, because it can all change, right? So we've espoused conservatism and religiosity as we committed genocide against the Native Americans, as we shipped slaves in. And I'm not saying everybody was conservative. And a lot of people don't think politically or like that. A liberal, as defined, willing to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own, open to new ideas. Related to or denoting a political and social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. Now, I'm not saying conservatives don't promote individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise, because they do. We need both. What we don't need is what's coming out of Nick Fuentes' mouth, what's coming out of Tucker Carlson's mouth, what's coming out of MAGA's mouth, right? Oh, we did a tax cut for everybody. Bullshit. Just read it. Go to my tax bills, frickin'. Give me a break. The Democrats have signed on to frickin' tax bills just like that for years. This one they actually fought. They're being a little less feckless. And finally, as we've gone through this, the feckless government, Trump Derangement Syndrome, who has it? From my point of view, if you're in MAGA, you have Trump Derangement Syndrome. And it isn't because that everything they do is bad. Targeted tariffs work, universal tariffs don't. Immigration reform works, ICE with masks doesn't. Grift exists, but Trump coins and anonymous donations to his crypto heaven and influencing with quid pro quo and supporting countries like Hungary, like they're the bastion of freedom, doesn't work. Right? And then the Heritage Foundation and their infighting. Boy, they didn't fight over the things I think that would be substantive. Instead, they're fighting over whether Nick Fuentes, now it's a substantive discussion to say there's a white supremacist that our head was saying that was a great interview, Kevin Roberts. But let's be honest, they were already supporting that. They weren't bitching about Nick Fuentes having meetings with J.D. Vance or dinners with J.D. Vance or meeting Trump. But now it's bad. That's feckless. Feckless is executive orders. It's a reverse opinion on it. People would say it's strong to do executive orders by the president. No, that's just circumventing representation. It's circumventing the House. It's circumventing the Senate. It's circumventing judges. The Department of Justice, feckless. Pam Bondi is the definition of feckless. Her middle name is Pam Feckless Bondi. We want to get rid of birthright citizenships. These are some of his executive orders. He wants to get rid of public health and vaccine mandates, Medicaid, ACA, affordable care, and labor-safe workplace measures. That's one of his executive orders, to get rid of labor-safe workplace measures. This is from Trump. Eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, because this was this giant woke thing. We don't need diversity. We don't need equity. We don't need inclusion. We just need meritocracy. So how does meritocracy work in MAGA? Now people would say I'm deranged on this, but they take a pledge. We know about the pledge. We won't raise taxes, and we love Trump. He's our king. He's our master. Is that meritocracy? Meritocracy is the sense that you're the best at what you do and you get there because of what you've earned. Did Donald Trump earn it? When he inherited all that money from his dad? When he had 6 or 7 bankruptcies, which is the definition of socialism? So, socialism is a philosophy, right? That the government helps. Communism is the government takes over. But let's talk about socialism as a part of our capitalist society. Bankruptcy. Now, you can't go bankrupt on medical bills, and I don't think on student loans, of course, because that's for the minions. That's for the bottom 90%. But you can't go bankrupt on businesses, which is mostly for the top 10%. And we pay for that. Society pays for that. So society or the government's paying for something that someone else did wrong or fucked up. Now, I'm a believer in limited bankruptcy, but that's a form of social behavior, social government. The VA. So people serve, they're wonderful. I'm a big fan of the VA. They get free health care or modified. Now in not today's world, they probably get shit. I'm a supporter of the VA. Seems like a little bit of a social activity. Social Security, which is a tax, not a benefit. You may not get it. You may die before you get it. That's social welfare. Are we not somewhat of a socialist society? Aren't all? Don't we need it? Don't we need forms of all of it? Peter Thiel said it. Anarcho-capitalism is creating a mess, is creating hatred by the proletariat, by the rest of us that work and don't own as much property as the next, don't fit into the mix of the authoritarian mix. He said it. It's gone too far. One, the top 1% don't pay enough because they have ways of getting around the tax. For years, even the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers are super conservative, not MAGA, but close. And now they're like, oh shit, people are getting pissed. We need to find out a way to help people, rightfully so. And we'll talk about this with AI, artificial intelligence, and universal basic income. We'll talk about this in taxes. And we'll talk about how would we possibly not have either cheap or free childcare for people that work or people that are disabled. We can't do that. Let's go down the Ayn Rand objectivism route. Each their own. If you lose an eye and your dad was a crackhead and you lost your arm, you have just as good a chance as Donald Trump did. Or Melania Trump, who got on the genius visa. Yeah. Let's see what else he did, this feckless motherfucker. Ending radical indoctrination, banning books. These are executive orders from the president. Restoring truth and sanity to American history. Yeah, like Hegseth putting Confederate names on military sites. Do we understand? I mean, Robert E. Lee walked away. Now, everybody says he was just fighting for Virginia, but if you read his writings, he wasn't a big fan of blacks. He was supporting slavery. Just walks away and gets to live on. Maybe that's kind of like the January 6th insurrection, but worse. So those are some of Trump's efforts to undermine Biden executive orders. I would call him a feckless Democrat in terms of his approach, how he really should have walked away, but he didn't. And of course, CNN and MSC will write books about that, but not about Trump. Some of the executive orders. He wanted to advance artificial intelligence infrastructure. That's a good one. Sets out to plan national security, protect national security, maintain economic competitiveness, revitalize energy infrastructure, and ensure U.S. leadership in AI infrastructure. Sounds like a good one. Now, of course, he did that in January 14, 2025, and then you had new executive orders coming out through Project 2025 and Trump. So he tries to support or neglected left-behind communities. These would be food deserts and things of that nature. Either way, they did executive orders. And I guess the conclusion of this is 1, listen and read. 2, MAGA, you have fucking Trump Derangement Syndrome. I think I've just proved that out. 3, Heritage Foundation, just call it what it is. A conservative, theological, white supremacist, authoritarian regime, backed by the likes of Kevin Roberts, backed by the likes of Megyn Kelly, Mark Levin, fuck that for that matter, Nick Fuentes, J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, Russell Vought. And that's enough. I want to dedicate this episode to a friend I lost last night. Life is short, life is sweet, life is long, life is hard, but we live on in their memories. Thank you.